What's up, guys? If you're listening to or watching this, then you are about to hear a preview of one of our bonus episodes of The Aux, only available on Supercast. On Supercast, we drop 2 bonus episodes of The Aux per month, which is over 3 hours of premium podcast content, plus the full video version of the other show I host, the Auxoro podcast, where I sit down with athletes, scientists, creatives, and others to discuss the exciting work that they do. Go to auxoro.supercast.tech today to subscribe and join Auxoro Premium. Thank you, and enjoy the preview.
So he's the public health service officer that was involved in the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And he says that, quote, "These Negroes are very ignorant and easily influenced by things that would be of minor significance in a more intelligent group." And so he's basically saying that Black people are stupid. They're easily manipulated, easily swayed. And so you could see how this could make them a good target for an experiment that relies on them not asking questions or not knowing exactly what it's about. And then there's a hypothesis that goes along with the experiment.
Wait, and this was a Black man saying this, that Black people were stupid?
This was Dr. Clark. He was white, public health service officer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's the one who said these Negroes are very ignorant and easily influenced by things that would be of minor significance in a more intelligent group. And so you can basically boil that down to Black people are dumb. They don't know what's going on. We can influence them, make them think whatever we want because they're not white. And then there's a hypothesis that goes along with the experiment, which is syphilis affects white people's brains because whites have a more highly evolved neurological system, more vulnerable. And Black people, they would get more damage to the cardiovascular system from syphilis because they have less sophisticated brains. So the thought was that syphilis is attacking white people's brains because white people are more highly evolved. We have better brains, which is of course not true.
It's so ridiculous how people would just pull stuff out of their butts like back then and just say it as fact.
Yeah.
Like things they had no proof of.
And so they thought that Black people, it would be more damage to their cardiovascular system rather than their brains because Black people's brains weren't evolved enough to get attacked by syphilis. And so they're basically saying that white people's brains are like a big, juicy deer waiting to be hunted by syphilis. We're so highly evolved. Like the disease of syphilis is just picking off our brains because it's so big, it's so intelligent, and of course it's going to attack white people's brains.
So you would get the most syphilis if this was true.
Yes, exactly. And then Black people's brains is like a sickly deer that no one wants to kill because it's not it's not attractive to the virus. So instead of attacking their brains, they're going to attack the cardiovascular system. So that's the hypothesis, that they think Black people are going to get mostly damage to their cardiovascular system rather than their brain because their brains are not as highly evolved. So heavy race influence there. And then something I forgot to mention before is that another way that they got the men to stay in the study, the 600 men who they weren't treating at all for syphilis, they got them to stay by promising to cover their funeral expenses if they remained in the study. They told them and their families that they would pay for their funerals if they stayed in the study for whatever happened. And so they let them do an autopsy. So if they stayed in the study and they let them do an autopsy on their body, if the Black men and their families gave the researchers permission to perform an autopsy after the fact, the research group would then pay for the funeral. And so they said, yeah, because funerals are expensive. And then they would get the body, be able to study it post-mortem, which is what they wanted, basically. And then they would pay for whatever funeral the family wanted.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting to me, all this stuff back in the day, just like, yeah, what people thought without any science to back it. And then people just assumed it was correct, like white people being smarter than Black people. It's like, it's so nuts to think about. Like if now someone came out and said, like a scientist came out and said that they would be like a pariah, everyone would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, you don't have any like scientific proof of that. But back then people were just like, okay, I guess. And also it's funny how, why, I mean, this is like a stupid question, but it's like, why are the black people like, why would their brains be smaller and not like it's like it could easily be that white people are the ones with smaller brains and black people have bigger brains. Like the whole thing, it's just like nonsensical. It's so like interesting. I guess that's like the basis for like all of racism and slavery and all this stuff. But it's just silly. It's like, I mean, there are people nowadays that are still like extremely racist that would say things like that. But the majority opinion is that like if someone came out and said that on TV or whatever, most people would be like, you're nuts. But it's just it's like such weird. It's so hard to put yourself in the mindset of like I'm sure not every like there were progressive thinking people back then, but to think like that's how you would be thinking back in the day, because that's just like what was accepted, is really interesting to me. It's like you can't even really like think that way now because it's just so silly.
Yeah. And well, slavery ended 70 years before the study started. So historically, that's pretty close. And black people weren't getting nearly the same education as white people. There was still heavy segregation at the time when the study started. And so you have black people that a lot of them are illiterate. I'm not exactly sure how illiterate the poor white population is versus the poor black population, but I know a lot of poor black people were illiterate.
Well, they probably had more access to schooling at like lower, even if they were like equal in poverty, they probably were more accepting of like poverty stricken white people than black people for schooling and stuff like that. Yeah. Or it was just accepted probably that a lot of black people couldn't read and things like that.
Yeah, they had less access to school. They had worse education. A lot of them were illiterate. And so you could see how someone that should know better, like a scientist, would come in, and it's not an excuse at all. But if I'm trying to find any rationalization for why they thought black people's brains were less evolved than white people, structurally and biologically, maybe they saw the surface level illiteracy and the lower level of education that black people were receiving, and so they thought they were less capable. And they took that as being less intelligent and less highly evolved, when if you look at it, black people are just as capable of learning anything as white people, and any other race is capable of learning something that another race can learn. There's no evidence that, any race is more capable of acquiring intelligence or acquiring knowledge than another. But these researchers who should have known much better took these surface level things, these surface level sufferings that black people went through, like not having access to books or not having access to education, being illiterate, and having their wealth cut off from slavery. The black people weren't able to acquire wealth for generations, and they took that as, okay, black people's brains are inferior in some way.
Yeah, it really has nothing to do with their skin color. It's really just about how their circumstances, like where they live or how they grew up. I mean, a white or any race can have the same like negative circumstances as any black person. Like, any people just would like, I feel like they just made their, I can't think of the word, but basically just like in their head, they just like made it to be their race, where it was really like a million, like they treated them badly. So just like that was one of the main reasons why they were poorly educated, because they just thought like, oh, they should be poorly educated, they're less than us. But like it was all just like circumstances. Like if we treated any other race that way, they would be the same way.
Yeah, I mentioned the arsenic before, and so
did you just say you put arsenic in my Starbucks?
No, I put arsenic in my own tea to punish myself. I'm giving arsenic to myself right now to punish myself because I didn't work out today.
So that's you always do
inflicting damage on my body. I would have inflicted damage through inflammation by working out, and because I didn't, now I have to punish myself. And the lash of choice is arsenic tea.
Should we let the podcasters know that we won't hear you for a minute because the EMTs are going to come in and restart your heart after you drink the arsenic?
Exactly. If you hear sirens in the background, it's because my heart stopped.
Yeah.
And I'm being resuscitated.
If you hear silence and
but
then
I will tell them that
a couple seconds of silence and then you're and that's Zach coming back to life.
I will keep a sign around my neck that just in case I pass out, I'm going to wear this sign constantly. So if I'm ever in a situation where I'm being resuscitated in the back of an ambulance, they'll open up my shirt and they'll see the sign.
It says Auxoro.
And it says record. Yeah, exactly. It says record immediately after resuscitation. So if I happen to pass out during a podcast and be resuscitated, they will know to have a microphone ready for me to record, or I will have a microphone on me constantly with the sign around my neck that says record after resuscitation. So I can come back and be like, today I am here on the Aux and we are continuing from the previous the previous portion of the conversation where I lost consciousness from drinking arsenic tea, and now we are back. And I'm interviewing. This is actually a setup.
Yeah. What was that?
This is actually a setup because I was supposed to do a podcast with an EMT and he canceled on me. So that's why I'm here interviewing you now in the back of an ambulance, because you just resuscitated me. So that's my trick into getting in a podcast interview with an EMT, is to purposefully make myself pass out or poison myself, have someone call the ambulance, get resuscitated in the back of an ambulance with a microphone, and then boom, I wake up and start recording the podcast right there. And that's content. That's how you survive in these streets.
He actually keeps a device strapped to him that looks like a bomb. So it starts like counting down from 10. And then when it gets to 0, it actually starts recording. Yeah. That's not a bomb. It
kills everyone.
Yeah, that's it. And then it starts recording because it's in a bomb-proof. Okay.
Yeah.
Zach, if you're listening to this, I'm dead. I just blew myself up and 30 other people. No, it's actually a countdown timer to start recording. But they think it's a bomb, so they leave them to die in the ambulance.
Exactly. So about the arsenic that I mentioned before, to get back to the poison. I mentioned that these men were given arsenic, and so they were given arsenic and mercury compounds that were initially thought to be therapeutic. So this was their actual attempt at the treatment early on in the study. If I'm remembering correctly, the first couple years, they were giving them arsenic and mercury pills, the pills laced with mercury and arsenic. It was actually thought to be a therapeutic treatment back in the day when this study started back in the 30s and 40s. Now, of course, those are both classified as toxic, which is why I would never actually put arsenic in my tea. And then this is where it gets dark. The men were given something called pink medicine. And they were told it was treating their bad blood, whatever was wrong with them. But it was actually just an aspirin concoction. It was like water, sugar, and aspirin. And it was called pink medicine. And they were told it was going to make them better.
And then, so it was just like a placebo. What did they?
Yeah, so
they had no idea.
It basically just kept them. Yeah, they had no idea. It just kept them coming back to get treatment. They were also getting spinal taps too that were framed as treatment to the men in the study. But everything was done to acquire information from a research standpoint. So these men were basically treated like study subjects. And so the pink medicine was to keep the men coming back for treatment because they were told it was going to cure whatever disease they had in their blood. They were never told it was syphilis. And then the spinal taps, they were also told was treatment, that they were going in and giving them something directly in their spine. But it was really just to get spinal fluid to study the effects of syphilis.
Wow, that's pretty messed up. It's crazy that they must have had discussions that said, let's think of some fake treatment to give them to trick them into coming back, because they obviously know the aspirin's not going to do anything. So nobody,
and then
I mean, based on what you read, nobody was ever smart enough to find out like, hey, this is bullshit or something? Did anybody speak up at all from like what they've said during the experiments, or everyone was just like?
So from everything that I went through, which was 10 to 15 different sources on this Tuskegee experiment, I didn't find any recordings of the men in the study speaking up about being wronged in the study or asking questions. There were survivors of the study that spoke up after the fact that are in documentaries talking about their experience, but there's nothing that's being recorded, or nothing that I've seen, at least that was in the research I looked at, that is actual, someone performing research writes in the log, these men are starting to ask questions, or people just stop showing up because they found out it was related to observing them rather than actually treated them. I didn't find anything. I'm sure there were men that asked questions and were like, what is this actually doing? And
they probably just lied to them.
How is this? Like, I've been getting this pink shit for 10 years. Like, it hasn't done anything. I'm getting worse. And so they might have just been taking advantage of the fact that these men didn't know a lot about